What's going on, everybody? Tim from Tierfon Orbital. Another day, another SK. So I'd like to go over in depth a little bit a Warsabers SK that I recently finished. I actually just did one of these a couple of weeks ago and made a post, like when I did the glams for it. Somebody reached out to me and said that they wanted one exactly like that. So I think they ordered it direct from Warsabers, which got here very quickly, to my surprise. Warsabers shipped directly to me. So this was a relatively familiar install for me because I had just done one. However, with this particular install, I approached it a little bit differently. I chose to forego some of the PCBs that are supplied with this hilt. I just found that the previous install, because there were a few points of failure with these PCBs, I chose to wire up some stuff directly rather than go the ribbon cable route and all of that. So we did retain USB-C charging and board access through the control box, but I wired up the neopixels under the clamp card separately. I added my own neopixel strip behind the crystal chamber. So I added my own 2020 neopixel strip, which is a little bit more dense than the PCB that was included. So the PCB that was included for behind the crystal chamber had 6 neopixels on it. I was able to fit a 9 neopixel strip behind there. And I also directly wired up my blade PCB as well, obviously, right? So I did want to, we did want to retain the USB-C port in the control box, but other than that, everything else was wired up independently, okay? So, and I also weathered this hilt. So it was a pretty easy process because I had just done one. I really like weathering SKs. I don't know what it is about SKs and weathering them. For me, it's I don't know, it's a lot more fun than some of the other hilts that I've done in the past. Probably because I've weathered more SKs than any other hilt. But anyhow, so let's come into Fusion and talk about this chassis. It has changed just a little bit from the previous version, and then we'll come up top and do a demo, right? So this is the chassis that I did for this hilt. The only difference in this chassis, between this chassis, and the previous install had a notch cut out of the nipple here. That was to allow for space of that long PCB that Warsabers includes. Because I chose to forego that, I did not need to have a notch in the chassis. Other than that, the chassis is exactly the same. I've got my tube work and greeblies along each side of the chassis. I did add some different like cutouts in the chassis itself. This is just, all this is an SVG pattern that I emboss onto the chassis. Right. One of these days, I'm going to go over a chassis design video. I've said this before. I do a lot. I do about 85 to 95% of my chassis designing in Shaper, and then I import the model as a step file into Fusion to do some final edits. Right. So I do all of my emboss work in Fusion for the negative and positive battery tab. My logo is embossed on here. This pattern that's embossed, that's done in Fusion. Fusion is great for that stuff. Shaper can't quite handle that just yet. I also do all of my, like if I need to thread a part or thread a chassis, I do all of that in Fusion as well. So I've been meaning to do a series or a video on my chassis design process on Shaper. Folks like Benji from Nerf Herder Customs, I think Jeremy from CCsabers as well. I know that Jeremy's done a series of videos on chassis designing in Fusion, but I feel like there are some people in the community that are migrating to Shaper, and I feel like it would help a lot of people if I went over what my design process is in Shaper, right? So anyhow, this indentation here is for a USB-C charging module. I wire that up and rest it and press fit it into that area. I've got 2 very small holes for my power leads for that charging module. Because that's such a low amperage charging module, it's essentially a trickle charge, right? You can get away with using a very small gauge wire for that. So those come out the bottom here and make their way all the way up to the top. We've got a 28mm speaker at the bottom here. Battery tray is around back. And around the side here, around this other, the back, front, however you're looking at the chassis, this is where the Proffie board sits. This is a Proffie V3 install. It just slides up underneath this lip and is held in place there. No kill switch on this chassis either. There's just no room because you've got to get this charging module in here. Not a lot of room in the waist section of the hilt to put that. Right? So that's it. Nice and simple setup. You know, another thing that I don't often talk about is wire management. I try to cut holes to bring my leads up the chassis, right? So we've got to get, in this particular build, we've got the 4 leads for the battery charging module. I've got one 22 gauge lead for my negative battery terminal. I've got 2 leads for my speaker. So a lot of stuff is coming up the side of this chassis. Sometimes it depends on the build, right? For me, for this particular one, I just cut squares into the chassis. They're hidden underneath this trough here, and they are underneath the Proffie board. I also like to cut a big, wide enough channel underneath the board so I can hide my wires and they're not pressing up the board, you know, pressing it out of the hilt. And that's it, right? So let's come up top. All right, this is the Warsabers SK. Really, really beautiful hilt. The first one I did, the first thing I noticed is there's a lot going on with this hilt, right? It's a very, very well designed and well machined hilt. How do I know that, or why do I get that impression? All of the parts are modular. I always have a hard time saying that word. All of the parts are removable. The spines here, they're all held in place with set screws. One of the set screws for each is hidden underneath the pommel. You know, very, very nicely designed hilt. All of the, like the copper rings can come off if you want to weather those separately. The brass rods and the brass crystal chamber are really, really well machined. It's just a very, very nice hilt, in my opinion, right? As far as SKs go. So it's a very, very nice hilt. Really, really nice. So I did weather this. I did my usual pass of aluminum black. I then went in some of these grooves and channels and added some burnt sienna wash to make it look like it's been rusted and grimy. The brass in the crystal chamber and the rods were weathered naturally, so that's why you see that green patina on them, okay? The top emitter section, so I did not know this. The previous Warsabers SK that I installed did not have a heat stain tip, but I believe that's because it stayed with the client. Another cool thing about this kit is Warsabers includes a heat stained tip and a regular like naked tip as well, right? So this was heat stained by Warsabers. I do typically treat all steel parts with either Renaissance wax or some sort of sealant. Steel does oxidize, so to keep some of that heat staining color, I do, and to protect it from rust, obviously, if it's not stainless, I like to put Renaissance wax on it. So that was treated with Ren wax, and that's it. Yeah, the brass pins were also weathered naturally. And that's all we got. It's a nice hilt, solid hilt. So let's talk about how to use it. Unthread your grip here. Here's our battery tray. The chassis has remained matte black for this particular install. I feel like that looks a lot better anyhow. To use the hilt, let's talk about the Proffie board first, right? So here is the Proffie. This is a Proffie V3. There is that USB-C charging module. This USB PCB that you see plugged into the board, that is a ribbon connector, goes underneath the board up to this control box, and that's what we utilize that USB-C port for. So you can charge your battery as well as get to the board through that port without taking your grip off, which I find to be pretty handy, right? Okay, so spring side is your negative. Take the flat part of your battery, rest it in that battery tray. So you're not gonna, there's no kill switch, so the power will be on as soon as you put that battery in, and you'll be able to tell because you'll get an audible cue and you will get the crystal, depending on the font, the crystal will light. So depending on, so each font's got a different animation in that crystal chamber. We do get some nice shine through in that glass eye, and then there are neopixels underneath the clamp card as well. Right. So once you get your battery in, slide your grip on, tighten it up, and you're ready to go. Let's come down to the bottom. So I tried to switch up the animations that are in that crystal chamber. In the config, the two neopixels underneath the clamp card, they are just essentially the same blade config as the main blade. So that's why you see like this two-tone color. If I had a blade in here, there is an emitter spark in the blade animation. That's why it's a two-color. Let's put a blade in it. This is a 1-inch blade holder. There is a set screw just above the glass eye. Another thing that I've noticed with the Warsabers SK, this back red button, it's not a red button because it's not colored red, but if that is fully threaded, it can affect the blade, right? So I like to unthread that a little bit, put my blade in, tighten that back red button screw, and then you can tighten your set screw as well. They both kind of serve as blade retention, but this front small set screw is really what you want to bite down on that blade with, right? So see how in this particular blade animation, I've got an emitter flare that's like an aqua color. That's why you see that at the clamp card as well. Tighten my blade a little bit better. There we go. What else do we have on here?
Ancient integration.
So the majority of the fonts on this config have also been set up with color wheel. To get to color wheel, you want to hold down aux and tap main. When you find a color you like, you tap main again. I'll lock that color in. Twist to activate, twist to deactivate it on. There's that animation. In the clamp card, and I've got different animations behind the crystal as well. So the neopixel strip behind the crystal is its own blade. There are also two neopixels underneath the crystal. They are their own blade. The clamp card, let me turn this off. The clamp card neopixels are their own blade, and then you've got the top main blade.
Don't talk back to your elders, child.
All right, great hilt. It really is a nice hilt. I am looking forward, this is not related to the Warsabers SK at all. I'm really looking forward to the upcoming SK that's coming from CCsabers. It was designed by Jeremy Puckett at Solo Sabers. Really looking forward to that SK. I also have a Solos Hold SK here for an install. That is another really, really beautiful, beautiful SK. The SK Starkiller in-game hilt to me is a super, super unique, iconic hilt. I mean, you can't go wrong with an exposed crystal. I think this, like the first time I saw this hilt, you know, ages ago when the game came out. I thought that having I never knew that you could have like an exposed crystal chamber, a lightsaber. So it's always been a very, very, it's been a favorite of mine for a while, right? I happen to have only one in my collection. I have a Corbanth version of this hilt, and it's a very, very old install. It was one of my first personal installs, so I'm really looking forward to getting a new SK in my collection in the form of the Raxus from Solo Sabers and SP Sabers. I'm really, really looking forward to that one. So anyhow, shameless plug. And that's all I got. To the client, thank you very much for trusting me with your install. To the viewers, if anyone has any questions about this particular hilt or anything really, do not be a stranger. And with that being said, may the force be with you always. Have a good one, everybody.